Hello, everyone. We are back to another session of the Global Foresight Summit. This year, the Global Foresight Summit is organized by the APF, the World Future Review, and Fast Forward. We have right now with us for this third session of the day, Gabrielle Rizzo. Gabrielle is was one of the speakers of the previous edition of the World Foresight Summit. We are really happy to have him here again. He's a PhD in string theory and astrophysics. He's the NATO's member at large in strategic foresight and future studies, and he's actually the chief futurist at the HEC in Lausanne. So welcome, Gabrielle.
Thank you. Great to be here with you.
You here again, so you can start when you want.
Thank you. Earth. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was. Frame-filling, awe-inspiring, this was taken by the Apollo 17 astronauts on the last journey of humans to the moon. But there is another picture of the Earth that is worth sharing. This was taken by NASA spacecraft Voyager 1 on Valentine's Day, 1990. Just after Saturn, our probe took one last glance homeward. And from 100,000 times farther away, from a distance of 6 billion kilometers, our planet is just a point of light, a lonely pixel. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. In the words of Carl Sagan, a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. A lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. We are so little and so alone. Why does all this vastness induce just dread more than reverence? Why does the dark bring us fear rather than awe? Because it's easier to indulge in our fears rather than challenging them, or even reframing them. When faced with the dark, the unknown, the uncertain, our reptilian response takes control. We fear what we can't see. Prehistorically, people would have been more at risk of being attacked by predators or by enemies when in the dark. In the dark, our visual sense vanishes and we are unable to detect who or what is around us. We rely on our visual system to help protect us from harm. Being scared of the dark is a prepared fear. Our fear of the dark is an evolutionary trait that we picked up to survive real-life predators stalking the night. And researchers have hypothesized that this innate fear stems from a point of human history when we were nowhere near the top predators we are today. So though we don't technically need this fear, it's still there. It's implanted in our psyches. Being afraid of the dark is, in essence, a fear of the unknown. The unknown is an inherent association that humans make with the dark, as it prevents them from seeing distinct shapes and veils potential threats. because we fear what we can't perceive or can't understand. And we know that from the very beginning of time, dark is the quality of the night. And it's what could hide any nefarious actions that might be perpetrated under its cover. We can't see what's out there, and it freaks us out because our imaginations fills it in with the possible worst thing. For ancient humans, it was lions and other predators. And in today's big predator-free cities, it's monsters. A great example of how this works is horror movies. They never show you directly the monster because your imagination makes something way scarier. We create monsters because they feel that predator void. And monsters activate our fight or flight modes. And when in this mode, our options collapse and our agency is paralyzed. The future becomes nothing else but an inevitable consequence of the present. And in the inevitable, we lose our hope. Because you can't hope for something certain. In much the same way you can't hope for something impossible. Think about it for a second. If you hope to win the lottery, you have to buy a ticket. But suppose you won the lottery. So you can't hope to win the lottery because you actually did it. Hope does not make sense then. Or suppose you did not buy a ticket. You can't hope to win the lottery because you didn't participate in the lottery. So hope to exist needs uncertainty. But uncertainty triggers our paralysis, makes our options collapse towards inevitability, and inevitability strangles our hope. We are in a paradox then. Our hope cannot exist without uncertainty, and we feel uncertainty with monsters that kill hope. How do we escape this? The problem here is that the monsters lying in uncertainty are continuously strengthened by the forces that shape the future environment. Let me frame this for a second for those in the audience who are not futurists. The first force is complexity. Complexity manifests in the overload of information, interconnections, relations, and implications, and in our hopelessness in solving this puzzle one piece at a time. The constantly growing number of stakeholders that are involved in a scenario, combined with the interconnection, its irresistible change, and the confluence of technological and socio-technological trends represents the paradigm shift from a complicated to a complex environment. Whereas in a complicated environment, the analysis of the interactions among many actors can still deliver reasonable conclusions that are able to make sense for decision-making, in a complex environment, there are simply too many interactions to be understood in their entirety. Complexity reflects the impossibility of capturing the entirety of interactions and their inextricable nature. New ways of framing the problem are needed in complex environments. And General McChrystal summed that up egregiously in this very dry comment after he was shown this impossible tangle that has been named since then the spaghetti slide. But it's exactly what complexity is about. We cannot disentangle the big picture. And even worse, as a classical measure of complexity is the richness of connections, the more connected we are with one another, the more complex the system. Thus, in an era of growing interconnectedness can only make complexity grow. As simple as that. The second force is the convergence. The convergence is the confluence of future trends and themes and represents the increasingly intertwined nature of technological progress. Interactions and intersections multiply each other their effects and bring an explosion of innovation. The convergence is chiefly driven by the rate of technological advancement that affects almost everything from political, human, socioeconomic to environmental. Interconnectedness will open up the potential for more interactions between trends, and it will result in a boost of technological innovation. The increased rate of advancement in single technologies will lead to new technologies and novel usages that will have disruptive impacts on a massive scale. We are in what is called the second half of the chessboard, the saying that comes from the legend of the creation of the game of chess, where the creator of chess went to the emperor showing his masterpiece, and the emperor asked what he would have wanted in return. And the legend says the man asked for a grain of wheat doubled for each square in the chessboard. So 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on. But the point is, we rapidly lose track of how this doubling goes on, because the first square of the second half alone contains more grains than the sum of the entire half. And on the last, more than 2 billion times as many as on the first half of the chessboard. And the entire chessboard there would contain more than 1,600 times the global production of wheat. Convergence implies that the big picture changes constantly. Convergence manifests in the confluence or the stacking up of different science fields or technologies. It's the recombination of innovations and their transferability to other fields, even non-adjacent. For instance, in physics, we had an intriguing confluence of polymer physics into solar physics. Or looking at a field that's very much on the hype these days, AI. One famous example is transfer learning. That's a general property of a trained AI networks that allows a trained AI to be used for another different task and still be able to use the knowledge that was gained in the first field. More in detail, transfer learning is a research problem in machine cognition that entails storing knowledge gained when solving one problem and applying it to a different one. Or yet another example of the convergence, how Liverpool Football Club employed missile tracking electro-optics technology and data science to recruit players and uses mathematical models to select its manager. Exponentiality is the last force and is an effect and a cause for the convergence and complexity to happen and thrive. This is the characteristic of many trends, mainly underpinned by technology, of multiplying their effect by a constant factor over a limited amount of time. The epitome of this trait is found in computing power, as Moore's law, but it's not the monopoly of that field. There's also connectivity, volume of data that share the same behavior. Exponentiality brings, in turn, an exponential compression of time, because time has exponentially more value than before as a resource to achieve the desired end state. Exponentiality is the force that makes the big picture enlarge constantly. It is worth of note that not all trends are just exponential. Whenever two exponential trends are merging under the force of convergence, depending on some fundamentality characteristics, they produce over-exponential effects. Examples for this kind of uber trends are rare, but nevertheless existent, and will likely see significant and unexpected growth in the next 10 years due to the convergence's selective pressure towards exponentiality. There are already a handful of examples, as I said, but one of which is quantum computing. Quantum computing power has the potential to evolve at a double exponential pace. That is very fast. And just to give you an idea, very quick idea of how fast it is, in the past several thousand years, we increased our computational power of 60 orders of magnitude. Now the computing power of a quantum computer is linked with something that's called the size of the Hilbert space. And it's perfectly reasonable, looking at Moore's law and how it tied to how quantum mechanics works, to assume that we will be ending up in less than 100 years from now with a computing power that is 300 billion times more, 300 billion orders of magnitude more than the beginning of the century. So think of it for a second. I mean, we covered up 60 orders of magnitude in the past 10,000 years, 60. And we're about to cover 300 billion in the next less than 100 years. It's mind-blowing. So this staggering technological evolution is definitely unrivaled in the history of human species. And it is reasonable to start thinking in terms, as it was written in the previous slide, that humankind will experience 20,000 years of innovation before the end of this century. Let me introduce the last tool concept to tackle uncertainty and the beyond uncertainty. This is definitely for all those in the audience who are not futurists. This is the standard, one of the standard tools of futurists, the futures cone. On the one hand, it helps understanding the key facts about futures, that is that there's many of them, and not all of them are created equal, as some of them are just possible, so basically allowed by the laws of physics and not much more than that. And then there's plausible futures, those that are more acceptable from some perspectives. The probable futures are the small cone around the inertial future, that is the projected future, the today but more. And of course, you may not be willing to go straight in the inertial future, but instead move towards another direction, and that's a set of preferable futures. So while on one hand is very concrete and it serves the purpose in understanding one of the main concepts of future studies, on the other hand, the cone makes you slide in a trap. That the main bulk of the cone is made by plausible futures, and that the set of possible futures that are not plausible are just the small fringe way out of the boundary of the cone. But that's misleading. Because as plausibility is mainly built around perception, the scope we can picture evolves mainly in a linear fashion. And as Amarov's law states, we tend to overestimate effects in the short run and underestimate effects in the long run. This is extremely valid and proven over and over again in technology, but it applies across the board. So unless we're specifically trained to think exponentially, understanding and amplifying weak signals, and use our being are comfortable in thinking about the futures, that is mainly being a futurist, or there are whole regions that are completely precluded to our imagination, to our reach or access. And they cannot be used in our analysis because their backcast trajectory passes through the space of over-futures, where everything that is not practically possible or challenges the standard conception of science lies. At the same time, the exponential proliferation of options, the patterned area here, makes the small, tiny aperture underpinning what is plausible for our innate linear senses practically a single line. In some sense, this offers a different perspective of what Toffler's future shock can be. Too many options in too little time. Uncertainty then manifests in the overwhelming of our cognitive economy, that then finds refuge in our primordial response. This collapses options and complexity onto the sacrifice of hope, the safe certainty of the inevitable. Hope is our strongest and most foundational resource to beat uncertainty. Hope helps us fill the predator void of uncertainty with constructive alternatives rich of possibilities. Hope is our only way to exploit or empower uncertainty to move beyond paralysis, so that we can regain our agency and start acting. we need to claim back our right to hope, then, to hope beyond uncertainty. How do we do this? How do we claim back our right to hope? We need to reframe fear, build back options that makes us move from the high adrenaline tunnel vision to the high dopamine panoramic shot. In surrendering to our ancestral response, we relinquish the opportunities that are lying ahead. We need to change our discourse about the dark, using futures literacy to take back ownership of these changes, and future studies to enhance futures across the board. This transformation is also about agency. It is about changing the way we imagine the dark, from it being monsterified to being a source of creative tension or creative destruction. The unknown paralyzes our agency. This is about overcoming this paralysis. It is about making our approach more positive, as in constructive, or characterized by the presence of distinguishing features. Instinctively, humans feel the unknown only with a part of features. We need to be claiming back agency to use all the features of the unknown, all its contradictions and paradoxes, all its possibilities to amplify futures and strategies. It is about using light and dark, left and right, north and south, listening and integrating different conceptions of space and time, such as the ones that can be found in indigenous cultures. There's a second foundational question. Once we know how to positively create options, what options do we create? I follow Florida's argument on hope here. What is the ultimate end of our endeavor here? Hope. So the options we are creating should be oriented towards that end. And the more important, the more valuable the final hope, in a sense. But how do we assign value to hope, though? Remember that hope exists if and only if there is a belief and the object of hope is neither certain nor impossible. So what could we hope for? Having the next iPhone? Well, that's not much of a hope. Having a good job? Well, that seems better already. Having a rich and fulfilling life? That's escalating. So, if you buy that the value of hope is the value of the object of that hope, and that's a big if, as you're buying a lot with this, then if you're buying this, then the most valuable hope can only be the existence of the divine. That is not a hope that we can act upon, however. I'm not talking about faith. I'm talking about hope. So probably the best we can have instead is hoping for the qualities of the divine and create a positive human transition through a supremely ambitious and transformational vision for the long-term civilization's direction of travel. The long-term civilization direction of travel is the understanding of the forces acting upon the long-term trajectory of human civilization. To rethink the civilization's inertia, that can be seen like at the set of internal forces, and positively shape the external forces, for instance, through social transformation, radical technological breakthroughs, putting human civilization on a fundamentally different course, or post-scarcity transformational paradigms. This hope wants to prepare a state change in human civilization. I want to be extra careful here. I am not saying we need to go after technologies of hope. Technology is neither good nor bad, but nor is it neutral, the first Kranzberg's law. But turning back to the theme of the dark and our fear of the dark as an evolutionary trait that we picked up to survive real-life predators stalking the night, well, humans only really became the super predators they are today with the advent of technology. Through technology, humans made darkness a choice rather than inevitability. With this positive lens, humans are not racing against technology and neither rebelling against them. Humans and technologies weave, intertwine towards the most valuable North Star we could ever have, the hope for the qualities of the divine, to create superhuman technologies. In this regard, it is more important than ever to cleave technology, to unglue it from the effects of technology. The strong exponential track of technology already charts a course towards infinite capacities. Technology foresight will not be about technology anymore, as effects will be created from so many different, so unexpected and weird combinations that we will need to focus on the effect and not on a specific technology building block among the 100 composing that effect. Qualities of the divine might only be reached through technology and not by technology alone. These two pieces, the one about a positive use of the future and changing our discourse about the dark, and the one about a positive human transition across its foundational pillars of peace, security, and human sustainability, are the two pieces composing the field of positive futures. Positive futures is about developing agency to drive our long-term civilization's direction of travel. It is very important to stress that positive futures is not about colonizing tomorrow. Rather, it's about perfecting transgenerational conception through enhanced non-generational thinking. Human sustainability is one of the key means to achieve positive futures. Peace, security, sustainability, and thus positive futures can only be reached if global strategies have at their core the place of humans within them. Looking at this from an anticipatory strategy approach, we need to mark our long-term vision, see what's coming ahead, and shape trajectories back to the present and towards future. That's standard foresight competency model. But human sustainability needs to be at the heart of these trajectories. And to match this level of ambition, a convergence of futures literacy and real life is needed. Today, in these times of uncertainties and fears of tomorrow, there is the call to field capabilities to rethink the world in terms of positive futures. Whether it means strategizing for technological or economic overmatch, as in the offset strategies or the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, or refocusing the world of work, rethinking entire sectors or functions like human resources, or shifting the narrative of the futures of humans, like with the decolonization of future, and maintaining a transgenerational approach, this direction demands for an instrument able to support the challenge. Organizations and individuals need to be empowered in building visions, concepts, and plans towards their preferred futures, and designing a meaningful, actionable transformation with human sustainability at its heart towards positive futures. That's why the University of Lausanne, at its highest level, with both the outgoing and the incoming new rectors, has embraced the concept and the vision of positive futures, with a candidacy for a UNESCO chair for positive futures and the creation of the Swiss Center for Positive Futures, that is in its final steps before the official launch in September. Together, the Swiss Center for Positive Futures and the UNESCO Chair for Positive Futures compose an exquisite match, a positive instrument for positive futures. Positive Futures is a supremely ambitious and transformational vision for the long-term civilization's direction of travel. And as Robert Heinlein, the creator of Starship Troopers, said, the stars will never be won by little minds. We must be big as space itself. And this brings us back to where we started, our pale blue dot, our very small stage in the vast cosmic arena. Because the great enveloping cosmic dark doesn't harbor only monsters, but to see the hope, the cornucopia of futures of abundance that are lying there beyond uncertainty, we have to transform the dark, our fears, and ourselves. We need to empower human sustainability on our pale blue dot and beyond for our generation and those to come to navigate positive futures. Thank you. There's quite some questions from the audience. Thank you all.
Hello, Gabriel. You can choose the questions directly from the comment side.
I see there's Kentan. Kentan, it's great to have you here. Would you consider action as a first step towards hope, and therefore having action offering the individual way towards hope? Well, everything starts, action is part of agency. That is the ability and will to produce an effect. So action is intrinsic, absolutely needed. I mean, we cannot hope and be static. That would be a very passive stance, and instead, in positive futures, that is definitely something that is envisioned and strongly stressed. So maybe action is not an individual way towards hope, meaning the single way, but as Marie is highlighting, is about the hope for the goal that we want to achieve, that then activates, takes back our agency and triggers the steps towards the objective. So action definitely a part of it, not the way to reach it. I see. I'm going across the comments. So if I'm missing something, you just please retype it. I see David. Do you accept that there are some very real dangerous issues in the dark which require very careful attention? It's not just mythical monsters. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's all a bed of roses and it's not all flowers and love. But we cannot simply look at one side. If you just look, I mean, I'm sharing a funny thing here. If you just look at the list of dystopian movies on Wikipedia, and you look at the list of utopian movies, you understand what I'm talking about. there's almost 220 dystopian movies, and there's, probably a bunch that are actually utopian movies, one of them being the Star Trek saga. So I'm not saying we need to disregard the part of the dark that we need to carefully assess. We need to be threat informed. I do a lot of my days are with the defenses of several countries in NATO. So this definitely needs to be threat informed, but it cannot just be about threats. We need to look at all the opportunities where we are relinquishing because we are too afraid of the threats.
Gabriel, thank you so much. I think we only have time for a last question. Maybe this is one from Minos.
How to reframe the fear and form an active hope in a social chaos. That's the core. That's the core of the point. To reframe, what's the call to action here? It's about reframing the way we look at these fears. Part of those fears are existing because of the way we are not able to imagine, to handle the proliferation of options. And another part of them are because we're not able to handle how we see our place in the future. So there's two pieces here. The changing discourse about the dark, that is, how do we change it? So we need to be better able to be better trained in handling these options, in creating them, and towards what end. And the other point is, how do we structure equitably, in a fair way, and in a sustainable way, the human presence in a way that doesn't trade the short term for the long term. Literature, we're working on this. We're opening the field. I see that there's several ecos around the web already. There's a theme about positive architecture. There was an initiative that was led with the PFL and another organization in Paris, looking at positive traits of cartography and geography. I think this is, we are opening the field, and we will be working more on this in the coming years under the aegis of the Swiss Center for Positive Futures, and hopefully of the chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabriel. This was a really inspiring session. Really happy to have you here with us again for the second year in a row. And yeah, looking forward to see you again very soon.
Great pleasure being here. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and watching us. We will be back in 2 minutes with the next session. So please remember to refresh your browsers.